My dear friends, this feast day is one of the old ones, and we have an inclination to believe that as we use the Roman canon, we are using the very words that those who honoured her way back were using. Her name is still there in the old Eucharistic prayer, along with many others of the same period. We know that she was from Syracuse in Sicily, a young lady who was wanted in marriage by one of the officials of the area, but she had given her virginity to Christ, and we know the consequences. So with her short innings, she went like a rocket and is still there in the maximum of glory, for the martyrs go straight up and with a huge configuration to Christ on the cross. So she made it. There she is, safe on the other side, leaving perhaps the one who wanted her in a less interesting position. Where is he now? And along with him, where are all others who sought glory, including perhaps the emperors themselves, who were deified here, but perhaps had the blues in the beyond for a long time? We hope not, but we wonder. And the Gospel itself reminds us of that reality. As by request we are celebrating in the old rite, we do well to pause on the last words of this Gospel, which talk about the wise scribe who takes from his treasure things both new and old. We do also to pause before what immediately precedes them, the description of the beyond, which nowadays people tend to take with a pinch of salt, as though they knew better, as though they were wiser than the ones who heard them before us, and indeed than the ones who pronounced them. We have grown up, and if one looks around and listens around, one sees that the norm is so hugely widespread that anything to the contrary is deemed ridiculous. Look at what the great ones even of Ireland say now in public. It all presumes that we have grown up, and that all this nonsense is something of the past. There are no consequences. Here, true to his Semitic origins, we have the Lord Jesus using Semitic terms. Now, the Jew, like the Arab, would have a concrete language. They do not go into adjectives and things of that nature. They describe things in terms of concrete objects. Here we have gnashing of teeth, teeth down under. We have wailing. We have a furnace of fire. Is that less true today than it was when it was pronounced? Let's look at the issue. What is thought to be ludicrous is the fact that we think that the teeth and the body and the voice box go on in the beyond. Okay, let's look at that. In this life, which part of us is responsible for our acts? Is it the tooth? Is it the limb in question? Or is it something of a different order? I would suggest to you that it is something of a different order, that of the will. What is the will doing? It is engaging with all the capillaries of the nervous system which command the limb, which is responsible. Now, when the time comes for those limbs no longer to function, do we think that at that point the other bit, therefore, does not go on, does not react or feel or know? Well, I tell you that modern science has discovered, and I say discovered, that actually by now the weight of proof is that the soul has an independent life. Look on some of the recent YouTubes that have been coming up from the highest scientific authority, and you will see that it has been proven, it has been shown beyond any shadow of doubt that under the highest and most controlled conditions of operating in the operating theatre, for instance in brain surgery, when the brain has to be put to clinical death so as to be operated upon in certain deep parts, that there is no sensory reaction at all in the person. The person is no longer there, but the person comes back and reports and knows things, e.g. what was going on in the operation at that time, and they are able to tell, and hence in scientific terms on neutral territory, to prove the soul therefore had its independent life. And when that soul therefore goes on to say where it was going and what it saw, it has no right, science, to say, oh, that bit is something different. Multiply that by a large number, because NDE, near-death experience, is far more frequent now than before for scientific reasons. We have the weight of testimony, but it is very serious stuff, and far more serious than we think, for this simple reason, that the soul at that point is alone, helpless, and with its baggage, and for the first time ever, perhaps, faces that baggage, and knows exactly the state it's in, without any possibility of escape or distraction. Because the great game, the great ploy of the enemy of the soul, listen to this, is to make sure that we're not in touch, that we're not thinking. Does that sound familiar with the culture of today? Look at them, all of them, from youth upwards, even from childhood upwards, vibrating with electronic games, all the time in a state of vibration and absence from their centre. Multiply that by many years and you've got a whole life of absence from the one thing that matters. Now, we're getting into modern terms. We end in the same place. Life runs out. But right now we are in a disadvantaged state compared with those of only 50 years ago. For 50 years ago, life was simple. Silence was heard. Conversations were calm, and there was not artificial noise. Therefore, with, especially in Ireland, people being exposed to prayer and to God, there was a greater chance of making it. Isn't the devil cute? And we think that we've got cuter. We're the biggest idiots around, and the biggest heads to boot. With regard to this issue, modern science has actually picked up more than we think. Just the other day, I was looking at the archives of the website that John has set up so that these teachings could be recorded, and this has been happening for a good while now. It meant, therefore, going back into the sound archives that John had put together. Because when I give a homily, he often adds something, and that's the interesting bit. It backs it up. And he, one time, backed up some homily I'd given by a very, very interesting bit of BBC sound archives. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. It was in the end of the 80s in Siberia, in the full force of the communist regime, therefore, the big hush-hush operation as regard anything which shouldn't be heard. What happened? They were boring into the crust of the earth, presumably for oil, and they seem to have got further than ever before in human history with very powerful means of drilling. And they also had a sensory system to pick up what was being drilled into. It got to a certain point, which perhaps is the point where things start to change in what we have control of. If one goes beyond a certain depth, one is outside the normal field of vision and knowledge and experience. That, by the way, has come out even more recently in the ocean. So the same very powerful modern means of boring even deeper into the crust of the earth. And they have found that in the lowest parts of the ocean, which are fairly close to the crust, the depth, the centre, things happen which are not of the same order. Things escape, which are very puzzling. Amazing quantities of inexplicable heat, which are able to melt and turn white, instruments of high-powered science. And strange, yes, wait for it, creatures emerge from a realm below, each one of a hideous nature and able to do hideous and strange things, like eat at metal and so on, and take forms which suggest the demonic. So before this, in the late 80s, this was picked up, but it was kept ultra quiet and secret. Nothing was to be said. For a short period of time, and it couldn't be otherwise because they were piercing so far down, the heat, after they got to a certain point, was so huge that it melted completely the instruments. But for about 30 seconds, the sensory systems picked up something which frightened the wits out of the communist scientists at the top. It was this. At a certain point, when they flipped into another dimension down there, it was quite audible and clear that there was, wait for it, a horrible, horrible, echoing cavern of human voices wailing. Now this was, by a strange chain effect, picked up within the realm of intelligentsia, and for some reason it was got into the hands of the sound archives of the BBC. Now, there was one man, an American, who was very interested in all kinds of phenomena, the preternatural. And for that neutral reason, he made an investigation and got hold of this rare archive. And his grandson or nephew, or even son, it was the same family directly anyway, after he had died, because he knew he had had it, found it and polished it up with good technical means so that it could be actually used again, detected as he had heard it. And the result is that it is actually on YouTube. There are several different versions of it, but the clearest, the one polished up, is very, very clear indeed. And it's to be found under something like Sounds of Hell in Siberia, or Drilling in Siberia. But the way to find the correct one of the whole series that appears is that it has the name of the one who was in charge of the operation, I think, on it. It's Dr. Azakove, I think. And that is only one of the doctor on it anyway. It gives you the clue as the clearest of them. But if you listen to it, and you'd be well advised not to listen to it if you're a nervous disposition, it is something which will change your vision until you die. Because no one would have faked it. And the fact that the communists would not let it be known is the best proof of all. They themselves did not want it known, because it disproved all that they believed in and refused to want to believe in. What am I saying? Do you see that when it comes to Ireland, the whole reversal in these last years of the norm in the air, that by now we have grown up and therefore we are in charge, and we can also make a mockery of what until now was believed universally in Ireland to be the means of grace, that is, the gospel, the Lord, and the church that he founded, is an indication that we are entering into a new and subtle form of the original sin, which was precisely that if you know certain things, you will be like God. It's just a new form of the old pride. And that element of being able to stand in public and throw moral stones and dirt at the means of grace is the top of, if you like, the nonsense that we're at, thinking that we're the best that ever walked this earth. But we're not excluded either from the danger, my friends. Why? We are also exposed to these media, and every time we give them a stage, we are colluding. Every time that we choose to have these things around us in the air, by simply turning on a knob, or not even turning it off if it's there when we come in, we are giving a stage. We are giving a voice box to the very one who wants that stage and that voice box. So we are responsible. We are taking away the virginity of our air, the clarity of our vision. We are allowing this noise to fill our mind and our soul. That time could be better spent quietly saying the rosary while driving or working, quietly ruminating on the gospel, because a second consequence happens too. Every extra word diminishes our capacity to appreciate the word. We are saturated with words, and we are less contemplative, because many words drain the soul, and that soul becomes what? Superficial. The soul of silence is a soul of depth, and silence is the safeguard of the interior world. And if we deliberately and willingly choose the absence of silence, unnecessarily, we are showing by a natural litmus test that we're not the friends of the Sacred Heart. So it actually demands coherence and logical consequences, because the interior life has its rules. And if we think we can get to an interior life without the minimum of those rules, we too are in a state of spiritual pride. We can do it by shortcuts. No, we can't. New and old, we respect where we have come from, and if in the past people have had a hard time getting to glory, we're kidding ourselves if we can do it by shortcuts. The Lord is unchanged, and the rules of the interior life have not changed one little